This is Speaking of Shakespeare, conversations about things Shakespearean. I'm Thomas Dabbs, broadcasting from Aoyama Gakuin University in central Tokyo. This talk is with Shoichiro Kawai, professor of Shakespeare at the University of Tokyo, and will focus on his innovative work as a director and a playwright, and his many contributions to Shakespearean translation and scholarship. If you are joining us on YouTube and wish to listen to this program as a podcast, you may click the link below to your favorite podcast platform. If you are joining us via a podcast and wish to watch this program, we are available on YouTube under the search term, Speaking of Shakespeare. This series is funded with institutional support from Aoyama Gakuin University and also with a generous grant from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. Professor Kawai, I finally got you on the program. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You are
so
busy.
Nice to see you, Tom.
Well, it's great to see you. I miss seeing you at the Shakespeare Society conference. We had to be online this year.
Yes, we have been online. Yes.
Yeah, and so that was a missed opportunity. We still had the ability to go to papers, but it's just not the same, is it? As meeting with.
Yes, I really appreciated your paper read at the conference. It was great. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
You know, it's so odd. We could go on about this, but I won't. But it's so odd on Zoom reading a paper to avatars. You know, and I think a lot of viewers of this program will have had the same experience doing that and teaching. But what I wanted to start out and talk about what I saw in an article about another interview of you. And it's about the Holy Trinity of being a Shakespearean. And I think I'm right, and you can correct me, but I think first is playwright directing, and number two, translation and translation theory that we'll get to. I'm very eager to talk with you about that.
Okay.
And also research and scholarship, and the focused on globalizing Shakespeare and Shakespearean adaptation.
Right.
So I'm going to go up at the top, playwright director. I had the joy of attending one of your productions.
Oh yes, thank you for coming.
You're thank you for inviting me. That was just wonderful. Waiting for Will, which you think about
you have a little poster there.
I have it right here.
Yes,
right here.
Thank you.
It's a great memory, during a time where we haven't assembled many good memories of public performance and conferences and so forth. And so it's right behind me. I love that performance.
Thank you. That's based on the Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. And we changed Godot into Will, which of course signifies somebody. And also
somebody we know,
somebody we are going to talk about. And I have put the famous line from all the 40 plays of Shakespeare into that short play. So if you watch that Waiting for the Will, you can just remember each famous lines from all the Shakespearean plays in one production.
I did, and I was joking with a friend of mine, a colleague of mine today, and talking about how my reaction was a little bit slower because most of the audience was Japanese, and I think most of the audience was fairly versed in reading Shakespeare, at least in Japanese translation. So I would hear some laughter, and then I would think about it, and so I was about 10 seconds late. Because I had to remember the line from Shakespeare and then the Japanese, the key words. And then to translate it all in my head and then get the joke. But it was fabulous. I had no idea. I knew that there probably was an allusion to Beckett in the title, right? But it was a Beckett-esque performance.
Yes, Beckett-esque, yes.
It was everything. I'll tell you a story in just a moment, but those actors were fabulous.
Yes.
And where did they come from?
Well, one is from Gekidan Shiki, and he was the first. He was in the first cast of the Les Miserables in Japan. There was a first production back in in decades, and he was in the original cast, and he was also a actor who worked with Ninagawa-san in his Shakespearean series. And so he was the founder of the Shakespearean theater in Japan. And the first Shakespearean translator, Odashima Yushi, who is the first to complete the whole work, as well as producing the plays on the stage. I mean, he translated the plays for the director Deguchi Norio.
Yes.
And Deguchi-san produced all the Shakespearean 37 plays.
The Jean Theater.
Theater. Yeah. And that Tashiro-san was the cast there. He was the founding member of the company. So so it's natural that he is very much versed in all the Shakespearean plays. So there are several plays that he hasn't played yet, but almost all he knew by heart.
Well, that was it for our viewer listeners. The Jean Theater, that was the Deguchi famously now. It was an underground theater at the time.
Yes.
And by Jean, I think there's an allusion to jeans and T-shirts. It's no frills. And they did the entire repertoire.
Right.
Back in jeans.
Yes.
In jeans, yeah.
Back in the 1670s. I was a student there. I was a student and I watched the Jan series, and I admire, I so kind of learned Shakespeare through Jan Shakespeare.
So were you also an undergrad at University of Tokyo? Yeah. So there you were in college, and you could go down to Shibuya, which is a very youth culture and so forth, and go in and see this avant-garde theater. And it must have had a great influence on you to see this avant-garde form taking place. And you were, I think at that time, if my translation of your credentials are right, you were studying with a famous professor at some point in the University of Tokyo, I believe, or maybe it was Cambridge, but you felt at one point of your career that you had to move away from your training by that professor and move and decide what you wanted to do, I think, in one of your interviews.
Well, I
break free.
Well, there are several famous professors that I've known. Could you specify?
I don't know which one. But you didn't specify. You said you had to break free of your teaching, but it had to do not as much with Shakespeare as with Beckett. It was the professor who
Takahashi.
Professor I think it's Takahashi's son. He had Beckett on his deathbed.
Yeah, right.
Yes. Okay.
He's my father-in-law.
Yeah.
Yes.
What great inspiration. Oh, that's wonderful.
He was also the vice president of the World Shakespearean Association. So he knew both Beckett and Shakespeare.
Yeah. Well, you should. When I went to your production, I got a pretty good seat on the second row, and a couple came down, and they obviously, of course, I think married couple. They were a little older, and I'm certain they wanted to sit together. And there was an empty seat beside me, so I gave my seat to the couple, because I've learned how to be polite living in Japan.
That's how you live in Japan.
Yeah, I was never polite before I came to Japan. No. And I went to the front row, which there were slightly lower seats and a little harder. And I want to relate this to an experience I had years ago. It would have been 1978. And I went to a production on Tottenham Court Road in London of this place that looked like it was about to be condemned as a building, just torn down. And we went into this theater, and it was Samuel Beckett directing the San Quentin Players. And I was a 21-year-old boy who, really didn't know what I was seeing. But famously, Beckett got released for life prisoners at San Quentin. He got them to allow these people who were in prison for life to get out and do plays with him. And those were the guys. They did Not Waiting for Godot, but Endgame and Crap's Last Tape. And there was a point in that production, I'd seen a good production of Endgame before, and it was done in a jocular, and you do this too, jocular, playful sort of way. You can do Beckett that way, but the San Quentin players did not. And I believe it's Ham and Clove. And there's a speech that one of them makes, and he's leaning on his legs, and I remember the pain in my own legs. It's like it was transferring, you know, because you could just see the despair in this actor's face, right? And it's just nothing, you never forget it. And so I was at your production, and I was sitting down, and Oshiri, I'm not as young, I'm not 20 years old anymore, and I was feeling a little bit of pain. And I said, yeah, this is perfect. You should feel some pain. The actors were so good. And of course, there's some pathos. There's a lot of pathos in that production. The Lear scenes, I remember in particular, you know, the Edgar and blind Lear, but it flows through all of these scenes that you have to be kind of quick to figure, and you are waiting. You are waiting to see. Yes. And I think did you do a production of that a couple of years ago? Was this a revival?
This is a revival, yes.
Yeah. Because this is a part of a multi-volume series called the Kawai Project. I should have said that at the beginning.
Yes. This is the 6th production. And yes, before this, I have translated Beckett's Waiting for Godot, and I produced that in the same theater. And I thought I knew what the play is about. And because Professor Takahashi is the expert, and I have traveled with Professor Takahashi to Dublin and see the original production there. And I think I knew what the play is all about. But when I translated that and produced that, it was so difficult because it's going circles all the time, and the actors always loses the place where they are. They kind of repeat the same lines again and again, and we have to check what's the happening in the play. Now at the end of the rehearsal, I figured that the theme of this play, Waiting for Godot, is the death. They are waiting for death, and so based on that understanding, I produced this Waiting for Will. And the will also signifies the will and testament, which also signifies death. So that's how the two old Shakespearean actors are spending the rest of their life waiting for something.
Yeah, I should add that these are older actors, and so they carried I guess the word is gravitas, but you can see, and they carried that with them. You know, these men, a kind of understanding, and there's a Japanese element in that. You know, if you think of Kinzabura and the famous Soseki, the famously kind of melancholic theme that runs in Japanese literature.
Yes, like the cherry blossoms are scattering around and losing.
Yeah. And oh, that was wonderful. Well, in that series, you have done several things. I think you started, and correct me if I'm wrong, you started with Much Ado.
Much Ado About Nothing, yes.
In 2014, and you innovated that. You had the audience in the center, I believe, if I read the description correctly.
Right, yes.
And they were surrounded by the actors who then integrated with the audience.
It's kind of an immersive theater, which is now popular. But it's very, very simple. I just scattered the audience seats around on the stage, so that the actors and the audience will be mixed together. And sometimes the actors will step behind the audience to sneak and so forth.
And then I think you followed that with the
It was Comedy of Errors, I think. That's on 2016.
yes, it was Comedy of Errors too. Comedy of Errors, yeah,
And also the Waiting for Godot in the same year.
yeah. These are interesting selections from you. Comedy of Errors, you went on that to much more levitated, much comic, and according to the description I read.
Oh, thank you.
And you do something I'm going to talk about later. You attempted to bring the spirit of rhyme from the English into the Japanese language, right, in that production, and make it more enjoyable for children and adults, of course, too. Yeah. And so it continues. And so what do we have to look forward to next with the Kawai Project? I think there's another performance of Waiting for Will coming up.
Yes,
Perhaps.
that will be performed next year as well, and it will be brought to Sibiu International Theatre Festival. But we haven't been told when it will be held in next year.
Yeah.
So we're just sending mails to make sure when we have to make sure the flights and so forth, and we are trying to figure out. But I think perhaps it will be in June or early July.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, you know, one thing good about having a Beckett play is you only have 2 actors you have to get scheduled for instead of 16. Or
exactly.
One of your plays, you had a lot of actors.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, like As You Like It, but which is done in 2018. There were lots of actors there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, you know, anybody who hears this or is watching, if they have a chance to see one of these productions, they're so, you know, they're sophisticated. I mean, you have to kind of go in with some background knowledge of Shakespeare and Beckett and theater, you know, the history of particularly theater of the absurd and the modernist movement, that sort of thing. Right. But there are a lot of people, there are a lot of us out there who are fans, more so than maybe participants, but as actors or directors. Now, and our audience should know that you do translate, but then you write. And when you're translating, that gap between English and Japanese, or any Western language and Japanese, basically what you're doing is writing. You're having to rewrite,
right,
and try to capture the spirit.
That's exactly.
Yeah. So as you have a translation theory that is different from what I was taught when I was studying under a great professor who had translated the Odyssey. And I won't say his name because he eventually went mad, like in Shakespeare. And I called him at home once. I had a question because he had good days. And his wife said, well, you know, he's just mad today. She used that word, and that's an old word. But and he's not crazy like Lear on the Heath, but I think he may have suffered from. I talked to another classicist. He said anybody who translates the Odyssey, it could drive you mad trying to translate the Odyssey. So I'm worried. I want to make sure that you're in good health. Because in your translations theory, he told us, our class, that you have to just at one point let go. And you don't let go. You said you want to lose nothing in translation. Nothing is lost.
Well, that's my hope.
That's the goal.
But practically, it is impossible to grasp everything because the language is different. Languages are different. But I'd like to express what was expressed in the original text. Yes.
And you work in one of your interviews, you talked about staying up at night. It keeps you up at night because you start thinking about, and I think it had to do with specifically the to be or not to be. And I think your translation has become the standard.
Well, it's back way around. I mean, my translation, to be or not to be, ikiru beki ka shinu beki ka, was there before I have done it. I mean, it was all the Japanese people knew this phrase, ikiru beki ka shinu beki ka. But curiously, this hasn't been printed in a book. And so I checked all the records. I went to the national libraries and checked everything. But because I was convinced that there must be some translator who has done this, because everybody knew 生きるべきか死ぬべきか、それが問題だ. That's the famous phrase in Japanese for to be or not to
それ
be.
は問題だ. Sort of internal rhyme in that, yes.
Yeah. But nobody has done it. So I thought I will be the first to put it into my translation. I was thinking of other different expressions to translate that to be or not to be, 耐えるべきか or 耐えざるべき or something like that. But because this phrase is so famous and nobody has used it in her or his translation, I think somebody should have used that translation.
So they just didn't use it. But you, well, we should first say for our international audience that there is no to be verb in Japanese. That is the first problem.
That's the first problem.
それは問題だ. It is
That's the problem.
The problem
That's the
with
question. Yes.
Yeah, the great Germanic term of a Dasein, of being, and Heidegger and all of this stuff that
there's no verb for be existence. So we have to translate that into to live or to die or so forth.
Yeah.
The Professor Odajima has translated into to be continue or not to continue.
Yeah. That's good too.
There,
well, I think you collected at one point over 40 possible translations.
Yes, I researched the other translations, and there are more than 40 different versions of 40 different Japanese versions of To Be or Not to Be, and I put that into my book at the end of my Hamlet. So you can enjoy the different translations for that single line, to be or not to be.
Well, with your permission, I'd like to show that image.
Yes.
Yeah, but those there they are. All of the translations.
Yes, wow. These are the 40 different Japanese versions of to be or not to be. That single line is translated in so many ways.
Yeah.
So it also shows that there are more than 40 versions of Shakespearean translations in Japan. So you can you can choose one from those 40, more than 40 versions.
Well, your career, in some ways, and I'm looking at this, reminds me of an old book now called The Anxiety of Influence by the Yale critic Harold Bloom. That when I first started in graduate school, was a big deal book about poets. For instance, if you follow Milton, you have to try to overcome Milton, or you have to find your own direction that isn't, kind of in that large space that Milton represents. So if you're Walt Whitman in America, or if you're Tennyson in England, you have these things that drive you. All right. So, there you have, of course, the great professors that you studied under and how influential they were, but then these great translators who have done in their own way, fabulous translations that, you have to enter this field and you have, but it must feel daunting at some point.
Yes, it is daunting. But the fortunate for me is that I have the Odashima sensei, who has done all the 37 translation plays into Japanese, and also Matsuoka sensei, who has recently completed her whole Shakespearean translations, and they are like my family. The Odashima sensei is the friend of my father-in-law. And Matsuoka-san is kind of like my sister, elder sister.
Yeah. So
I learned from both father and sister, and the little brother is now trying to imitate what they have been doing, and I kind of trying to find what can be added up. I mean, what they have left out. Like Odajima Sensei has translated all the meanings into Japanese.
Yeah.
And if you do that, the meanings, then because Japanese have many syllables, like when you say toad, you can say it in one word, in one single syllable, toad. But that would be hiki ga eru.
Yes.
That would spend 5 syllables. In that way, Japanese translation should be, it cannot but be a lengthy expressions. So what I'm now trying to do is to shorten the Japanese expression so that it will correspond to the sounds that is used in the original text. But that my previous father and sister were paying much attention to the meanings, and so naturally their translation should be longer than the original English. So I think it's my turn to focus on the sounds, not neglecting the meaning, of course, but should put more emphasis on the sound. That would respond to or correspond to the original theatricality intended by Shakespeare in the original text.
Yeah. Well, I am so surprised to hear, I probably shouldn't say this, but in Shakespeare studies in the West, and I'm not finding this with the people I'm talking with, but there's a lot of competition. And it can get kind of fierce at certain times. People kind of want to guard their turf. And I've been on news, the old listserv emails that they used to have, and things would get far, we talk about now in social media and people trolling and being so, but things would get, even some years ago, they would get very intense. And that you feel that close to other people who have done the same thing and attempted to climb the same mountain, but using different courses, and that you feel as they're as close as family. That they don't feel in competition with you, and you don't feel in competition with them. That's extraordinary.
There's a very interesting anecdote. Ninagawa Yukio, the famous director, known worldwide by producing Shakespearean series, and he has passed away. But when he produced Henry IV and the Henry VI, because they are in 2 parts and 3 parts, he wanted the play to recompose it, make it into a single play. And Matsuoka-san has translated the plays, and it was my turn to kind of reshuffle, to combine the 2 parts into one single play, and combine the 3 parts, 3 Henry VI into 2 parts.
Okay.
And Matsuoka-san and I are on very good terms. We are very friendly, and she can ask several things for me to do so that she can work much more easily, and we collaborate very efficiently. And Ninagawa-san was surprised. Well, you must be enemies to each other because you are doing you were both translators, and now you're working so cordially. How come? And that's what Ninagawa-san said.
Well, I feel the same way, but in some ways, now that I think about it, you two share an experience that if you don't get along, there are not many people in that family. You don't have many people who have been in the same mental and emotional existential space. So if you exclude each other, and I guess it's sort of like the ex-presidents in the United States. Sometimes people are surprised that, say, Bill Clinton and George Bush, younger George Bush, get along just fine. even though they disagree completely about things,
Right.
right? They have
Right.
shared that experience.
Right.
And that is far more important, perhaps, than however you have competed in the political battlefield or the
Right.
Shakespearean battlefield, whatever. But
Exactly.
I want to return just a moment to the
Yep.
idea of condensing, making shorter, because it reminded me of the
Mhm.
same challenge in the 16th century of the early translators of the classics,
Mhm.
say the Aeneid, which was in dactylic hexameter,
Mhm.
dun 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 dun. You know, every line in the Aeneid goes like that. And they tried these long lines, and Arthur Golding does a fabulous job in his translation of Ovid of using those long lines. But there were many examples of people who just failed dismally. And then that's when the innovation of iambic pentameter came in. And, you know, with the great example of Marlowe, and those, what Johnson called it, the mighty line, but that strong 10 syllable stressed, unstressed line that I put my students to sleep with every year. By saying, you have to learn this, and I'm not going to let you, I don't care. You have to learn this, and I'm going to test you. And you have to know the dun, the dun, the dun, the dun, the dun, or else you're not going to get Shakespeare. You're not going to get anything.
Yes, I completely agree with you. Yes.
And I'm so surprised, Sensei, that Japanese is such a syllabic language. It's based on syllables. You know, from your childhood is kaki kuke. You know, you learn your syllables all the way through. My daughter did. I remember her learning, you know, in school, and yet English syllables don't seem to be taught in secondary schools. I have to use the words, even the word syllable. For a lot of my students, they're just, English has syllables too. And there are about 30 or 40% of them who are just fascinated once you break it down to doing that. Yeah. And if I had any suggestion for revisions in Japanese English education, I would say teach people syllables and accents, and use Professor Kawai's example in his translations of Shakespeare, because you try as hard as you can to get that movement in the lines. Don't you? Yeah.
Yes. And also, I have been trying to reproduce the rhymes as well, since like I have translated King Lear last year, and I have this is, I think, the 15th Shakespearean plays. And when I translated Twelfth Night, I suddenly decided that all the lines of the rhymes should be reproduced in Japanese as well. In the beginning, I kind of abandoned it, and the previous translators all abandoned rhymes in Japanese because Japanese do not usually have rhymes. If we do that, it will be kind of rap music, and the rap and the rhymes are different. But in any way, I attempted from 12th Night onward, and now I make it a rule now to reproduce Shakespearean rhymes in Japanese, even if I will be condemned that will be a rap.
Well, I don't think anyone's going to condemn you for trying to rhyme, but it is more difficult. Maybe it's not more difficult as much as it is a little harder to separate from a sort of childlike feeling if you're rhyming in Japanese, perhaps. Yeah. And so if you two households both alike in dignity, right. Yeah, when you're trying to rhyme something that would be like in a sonnet, like the beginning of Romeo and Juliet, to gather that kind of momentum in Japanese would be very difficult, right? And well beyond my understanding of the language. But I just love it that you try to do it. I just love the reaching, you know, the reach, the effort. Because I think that it models what those poets, not just Shakespeare, but those many poets during the Shakespearean period were trying to do. They were trying to, well, like famously with Marlowe, overreach is that book, Marlowe the Overreacher, the character, but even the, you know, that sense of never giving up,
Right.
to being rather than not being.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, there may be more here, but I'm kind of interested also in a Jinsei Gekijo no Tatsujin. I love that title. And in English, Shakespeare, Master of the Theater of Life. That's a beautiful English translation, and equally and even very exquisitely condensed Japanese title. I love that. With my, and you know, I can't make any claims to native speaking at all. I'm nowhere close, but or to the feeling you might get, you know, having spent a childhood when those words are put together like that. But I'll tell you, in English, they strike a chord. You know, the master of the theater of life, right? And so in the interview, that's out now, is it out?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yes, because the interview was coming out, and I am behind. I am very behind in my book orders. I apologize.
It's on.
It's there. It's out there, on the shelf.
Yes.
Okay. Well, everybody listening, get it. Buy it.
The recent book I have done is this the anthology by the Shakespearean Society of Japan. This is new. This is this year, and I have contributed a one chapter here. Shakespeare to no Okan. It's the 60th anniversary of Shakespearean Society of Japan, and that's how this Okan means the 60th anniversary.
Yeah, Okan.
Yes. And the book that you mentioned, the Jinsei Gekijo no Tatsujin, was all about Shakespeare, what Shakespeare is, and how he lived, and what was his aim in his theater, and so forth. So I just tried to kind of write very kind of, how do you say, an essay which is already digested and digested for every reader, so that they will know very easily the essence of Shakespeare. So, for instance, I have used the idea of humanism, the idea which Shakespeare almost always uses in his plays, and try to explain, for instance, why he always tries to use fools and so forth, and that will be connected with the humanism understanding and also the Neoplatonism and so forth. And I try to kind of explain what is happening in Shakespearean plays, and that's the gist of Shakespeare, I think.
Yeah. Well, I was, you know, I'm from the American South. I say this, and it turns out in almost every conversation, but the master might not be such a good word in the context of the history of the American South and with the slave master relationship. And I probably should let our listeners and viewers know that in Japanese, master is a far different kind of connotation. It has more different kinds of connotations.
It's like maestro.
Maestro. That's right, which is, yes. And also, years ago, I don't go anymore, but years ago in Kichijoji, there was an izakaya that I became kind of a member of. And anyone, of course, in Japan understands that. There's no official membership, but at some point, you know you're a member, and I'm not sure, it's a mysterious thing. And the owner is always a master. And if it's a woman, she's mama. Yeah, and so everyone called him master. So, and he was a maestro because it was probably, you know how they go, it's like 12, maybe you could get 14 people in there. and it would be half empty some nights, and someone would come by and say, "May I sit down?" He goes, "No, we're full. We're full."
Ah.
He would look at their face and decide, right, because every night he wanted the right people, because it was about orchestrating conversation that night. People drinking, eating, having fun, and if you have one bad apple in there, it messes everything up. So he really directed that was his area. He was the master. And so, yeah, maestro of the theater of life. And it was a sort of in that little izakaya. I miss it so much, especially because it's everything that's good. It really is. Well, not everything, but so much that is good about Japan, in my view, being an outsider coming in. One of your themes, and still, is cultural adaptation. And there's more than just, we've talked a good bit about translation, but there's more than just language involved in moving a Western, let's call it that. I'm not sure if we can identify precisely what Western is any more than we can identify what Asian is. I get irritated with people who, Asia's so much, and but moving as the early Meiji directors and actors did when they were first adapting Shakespeare to the new theater, that effort still is out there in order to make something poignant and strike, that you have to do something with it that is probably not part of the original theme. That like I said, it sort of ties it in with the culture that you're in this case, Japan. So, yeah, any reflections on that?
It's a very interesting topic, because when you are involved in translation and also in adaptation as well, you sometimes get confused to demarcate between the two. I mean, translation can be close to be an adaptation, and I have adapted Shakespearean plays into Bunraku and Kyōgen, and I have done into Kabuki. There was the chance, but I lost it. So I haven't done Kabuki Shakespeare, but I've done Bunraku and Kyōgen. And that was a very interesting experience, because Bunraku has its own rigid frame. The Gidayubushi has its own Japanese rhythm and the sound, which is totally different from iambic pentameter. But in order to express that in Bunraku, you have to modify it, you have to adapt it and make it something which sounds like Bunraku. And that was a very good experience. But when I worked with Kyōgen, I have a very good friend of Kyōgen performer, Mansai Nomura. For him, I translated Hamlet in 2003. And that was my first experience of translation. And for him, I have adapted Richard III into Country Stealer, a Kyōgen version of Shakespeare. And because we have been working for such long years, I have translated Macbeth for him, and he kind of adapted into a somewhat Kyōgen-like in style, and toured around all over the world, making a very simple Macbeth in a very simple Japanese way of production, and using only the 5 cast, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and 3 witches. 3 witches will perform all the other characters because they transform themselves, and because they're witches, they will appear what the Macbeth and Lady Macbeth want to see. They are so the King Duncan is not actually the King Duncan. It's an illusion performed by the witch, and so forth. And in that way, I and Mansai, the Kyōgen performer, has been working in many ways and for such a long time. So we kind of because he is the Kyōgen man, and I am from Shakespeare. We kind of tried to negotiate each other, so that sometimes we can land on a little bit more on the Kyōgen side, and sometimes on a little bit more on Shakespeare side, and that will be, for instance, there was the Comedy of Errors transformed into Kyōgen style, and that was the Kyōgen of Errors. Well, actually, it was written by Professor Takahashi, but I worked the subscript and so forth, and we worked together. And in that way, we kind of trying to figure out how we can express Shakespeare as it is, or in Kyōgen way. We have been attempted several things so far. So it's very interesting to talk about adaptation and translation. For instance, when I adapted Richard III into the country's theater, the Kyōgen version, I first translated Richard III as a translation and let Mansai read the script. And Mansai asked me whether I have adapted it instead of translating it to faithful to the original. I said, well, this is faithful to the original. This is the translation and not adaptation. But Mansai found some similarities, found some similarities in Kyōgen. And there were the puns and the plays on word plays and so forth, and that was shared with Kyōgen as well. So that's interesting topic. And yes.
Well, to kind of clear up a little bit, the Kyōgen style would, I think we're talking about the difference in the amount of freedom that you might feel to adapt. And this is very strong, I think. Now I'm generalizing as a non-native about Japanese culture, but the tradition from Zeami was to be absolutely precise. And there is this, you see it in Ninagawa. I mean, what I've been able to see, there's not much out there. We're going to talk about that in a second, but when you see a picture of Lady Macbeth with the uchiwa, the fan placed right here, right? I suspect that if she's a centimeter off, he would say, no, it has to be there, right there. Absolute precision coming from the no and kabuki. And so when you get into a Shakespeare play without all of the instructions that Zeami left and the lineage of those, many, many great directors being absolutely precise, and that is the art, right? That is a large part of the art. And you get into this kind of loose Shakespeare that moves from heroic speech to a bunch of guys in basically a pub drunk talking about, robbing someone, right? That kind of thing. So that you would be faced with exactly how free do you feel you can move this in a cultural tradition where on one end you have people who would love the innovation. On the other end, there may be the kibishi type who goes, wait, I'm not sure if you're not sticking to the way of doing here, right?
Right.
And you've moved between both of these worlds, right? And it's, I'd like to call it a fluid movement, but probably it's a little difficult to step from sea to shore, back to sea.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that in your early, and I'm probably going back, and there's not a lot available, but I know overlapping. If you were in Cambridge during the period you were in, which I believe was the 90s, there would have been an enormous amount of critical theory that was being taught And you have done that, but you have shaped another type of career, it seems to me, away from critical commentary, more into a world of active doing, of hands-on doing this, right? Which, by the way, is the Japanese way.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's something I noticed immediately.
It's
When Michael
yes.
Jackson, when Michael Jackson first did the moon dance, right? People like me, Americans and so forth, golly, that guy is so talented. He was just so talented. I get to Japan and there are a bunch of kids out there, young guys out there trying to do the moonwalk, failing.
Yes,
failing.
yes.
But all night, they'll go there and try and try and try.
You don't imitate yourself?
No, we're not. Well, some people do, but not born imitators. We kind of sit and watch. And it's
that's interesting.
Karaoke is a great example. They sung the song. Let's us try to sing the song.
Yes.
And yeah, sometimes you hear a country western song that's easier to sing, maybe. But when you get Lady Gaga or one of these kind of great popular singers who have this enormous range, when you hear it, that I'm not going to make the range. I couldn't sing this song. But in Japan, there is that mimicry.
Yes, mimicry. Yes, I think Japanese people are so fond of mimicry, and they want to imitate things. Yeah, and they want to participate themselves. They want to do that themselves. That's interesting.
Draw it in. But I think that sort of defines a bit of you're not mimicking, you're making something new, but you're actively doing it. You're writing, you're directing, you're translating, and it seems to me that you're going to continue doing this. We get on in years and we start seeing retirement coming up and so forth, but it seems to me that you've developed a platform here that you can take well beyond the classroom. But tell us what's coming up. What could we expect, or what's in your mind? I know you're not finished yet. I can just tell by looking at you that you still have more.
Yes. Well, actually, I am now translating the Somerset Maugham and Edgar Allan Poe.
Somerset Maugham.
Somerset Maugham, the human bondage. That's a huge novel, and I have translated many short tales by Edgar Allan Poe, and I'm now writing the end piece. I mean, the kind of the essay to put on that at the end of that volume. And also I'm trying to solve the mystery of the death of Edgar Allan Poe. He died mysteriously at the age of 40. And so I'm now doing a totally different thing. And
and Poe and anyone else? Are you translating anyone else right now, or?
Right. Well, no, the Edgar Allan Poe itself is so huge, so you have to spend a lot of research on that, and I have done a little research recently on Edgar Allan Poe, but also I'm teaching Shakespeare in the university.
Yes,
and I'm planning to translate the Tempest for the next play. And I also have translated the two parts of the Henry IV, and it will be up in the Shakespearean series by Kyōgen, with lots of notes on the right side and the original text on the left side. And that will be edited. I think I have to check all the details and so forth. So there are lots of things going on at the same time. So I'm kind of
you're not stopping. You have much to go. Now, the Kawai Project, in terms of playwriting and so forth, do you think you're going to continue producing volumes in the future as a director, as a playwright?
I hope so, but at the moment I haven't got the slightest idea of what I will do next.
That's so interesting. That's so good. It's sort of what strikes you. What strikes you as being the thing you want to do. Because I was talking about getting older. One thing that's great about getting older is you feel the freedom.
Mm,
You don't have to prove yourself in the profession.
exactly.
You
Exactly.
do this. One of
Well,
my, yeah, go ahead.
yes, yes. When you were young, you tried so much to try to prove that you're here,
Yeah.
but now you don't have to
Well,
worry.
you
Mm,
have to, or you can't advance really,
mm, mm, mm,
and some of that is restrictive. That there have been many stories of people who kind of failed in their careers because they did not specialize enough. They didn't they didn't claim what one play by Shakespeare and become the expert in that one
mm,
play or
mm.
whatnot. But you're following after one of my favorite critics, Arthur Kinney, who's done so much work all over, and he's in Shakespeare, in Renaissance drama. But if you look back at his career, he stopped at one point and wrote a book on William Faulkner.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's
and he
interesting.
just stopped and wrote a book on William Faulkner. Now that would almost and other things. He was very, very interested in American Southern literature.
Mm,
It just caught his eye. And
mm,
I wish there were more of this.
mm,
We tend to over specialize. And
mm,
I'm so happy to hear, of course, starting with the relationship between Shakespeare and Beckett.
mm.
That's so fabulous. Do you look at any other, say, avant-garde dramatists of the period in that particular period? Or have any of them? Sean O'Casey. I mean, you were talking about Ireland.
Ah,
I'm wondering if
mhm,
Juno and the Peacock or whatnot.
Well, there are lots of plays and playwrights that should be uh, more focused on. But I think in exhibition plays, because I have majored in exhibition play drama, because I spent so much time in Cambridge on that period, I think we should more should be known to the world of these recent plays. Like for instance, in Japan, I think nobody knows any other plays other than Shakespeare. But there was Christopher Marlowe, John Fletcher, Middleton, and well, there are lots and lots more to show to the Japanese people, and I think we can enjoy them.
Oh yeah. Well,
Mm,
years ago now,
mm,
I was teaching, and we had more graduate students than we do
mm,
now. But
mhm.
we, I could expect 4 or 5 students to come in to learn Shakespeare, and that's a good size for a class. And one year I said, we're going to do Marlowe, and we're going to do Webster. We're going to do
Great.
the Duchess of Malfi, and some really good stuff. We'll do maybe Edward II. I had a good old BBC film version
Ah,
of Edward II, and with Ian McClellan.
oh, good.
It's just
Great. That would be
outrageously good.
wow.
I can't imagine anyone else playing Edward II now.
Mm,
But
mm,
and we're going to do some off Shakespeare. And I walked in, and there was one student in the
mm,
class, and she had to be there because she was directly my student. I was advising her thesis, so
mhm,
she had to. She
mhm.
felt like she had to be in there. I said,
Right.
"Where is everyone?" And she goes, "Well, they wanted to take Shakespeare."
Ah.
I said, "Okay, tell them we'll do Othello." All right, just tell them we'll start with Othello next week. We're going to start Othello next week. And 5 more people came the next week.
Ah, I
And
see.
then I slipped Edward II in.
Oh,
Uh,
good, good,
yeah,
good.
but I had to lead with Othello because they
Ah,
wanted to study Shakespeare. And some of them were in American
because
lit.
because they don't know anything
They don't,
else.
they don't know. And
They don't.
yeah, and there's a great production that I had of Duchess of Malfi.
Oh,
I usually just pick plays based on
mm,
being able to have access to good film
great.
productions.
Mm,
And I am a little distressed, and we'll kind of move toward closure here, but there's so much excellent
mm,
Shakespeare activity, not
mhm,
just in Tokyo, but throughout Japan. And
mm,
it's highly innovative in
mm,
various and sundry ways. There's the
mm, mm,
Meiji University has a standing group, I believe, and the other universities do too. And there are major big time productions that go on, but then there are also kind of community oriented productions that go on. What I've been a little bit distressed about is that there's not enough filming of, so we can watch these, and there is a protectiveness, of the original production and so forth. And I do wish there was, I could see more.
All right.
Particularly during a pandemic when a large we're sort of at home.
Yeah, you can see my King Lear in the reading production on the website. It's on the website of the Arto ni Eru by the Tokyoto Arto ni Eru. I don't know how do you call that in English, but
I'll find out very quickly. We have people who know that stuff around here. Even if I don't, the ability to gain access like this opportunity that you've afforded this series, because it's been a little bit hard to get some of my colleagues to come on in Japan because there's I think probably a inherent shyness and maybe that you don't have. You are out there.
Yes.
So I'm going to end by talking a little bit about young Shoichiro and being a boy in school and going through much more for our international audience than for our Japanese audience who all know the story, their own story. But you can be made to feel this way, and throughout the world they're educated. Well, you are going to, you're good, you're smart, you do your homework. Your teachers say, yeah, he's one of the smart ones. And you can be fashioned very quickly and very early on. And this is very much the case in the UK to be something else, to be what the African-American writer, Ralph Ellison talked about, being told all of his life what he should be and not being able to parse out, to pull out what he wanted to be, who he was. But apparently you did that. At some point, you said, I am, even though I'm a young man in school, I am bungakubu, I'm in culture. That's a big step, right? You step away from the sciences and the math and all of that. So at what point did you sort of feel like, I'm going to go the bunka direction?
I see. Well, that's a very good or interesting question, because actually I was not so good a student in the university. At Tokyo University, there is the Shingaku Furiwake, which is you all the other universities. When you enter the university, you have to decide whether you are going which study you are going to major in before entering that university. But the Tokyo University is different. They just received all the students for the 2 years, and then through that 2 years, they will just the right to choose their own direction according to their scores. So when you get a good points, you have the right to choose your own direction. Now, when I was in the Tokyo University, in the freshman, I wasn't attending the classes at all. I was doing and participating in the activities by Waseda Shogekijo, the Waseda Little Theater. And I was employed, as I said, I was employed by as a translator to help the International Theatre Festival and so forth. And I was not attending the classes. And I was also producing my own little theatre. I was writing the Salome Genso, The Illusion of Salome, and I produced that and so forth. So I was kind of intrigued with the actual theatre activities and neglecting my studies. So at the end of this Shingakuriwake, I find myself at the very bottom to choose my direction. And there was the only English department, which is where anybody can go, even the lowest level students can go. So that's why I had to choose the English department. And when I get to the English department, I have to choose whether the poems, the criticisms, or theater. And I was not, so because I was immersed myself with the theater activities, I thought I have to choose theater. And when I decided I have to choose the English department and the theater, then naturally, I think I have to choose Shakespeare. That's how I landed on Shakespeare.
Is there any point though when you, after you chose Shakespeare and you began reading and you thought this is okay? This is good.
The reason because I chose Shakespeare was because I thought I liked Shakespeare. Yeah. When I was a high school student, I watched Olivier Hassay's Juliet. Yeah. Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, and I thought, well, this is wonderful. And as high school student, I seem to have read much As You Like It. The reason why I remember I was reading As You Like It in the classroom of the high school is because my one of my friends asked me what I was reading. And I said, well, this is not an erotic novel. And I showed him the title, As You Like It. And he said, oh, that's an erotic novel. As You Like It. So,
there is, yes.
So I remember it, that I was reading that book in my high school days. So it seems that I kind of naturally immersed myself. I must have read the retold version because I was just a Japanese high school student. So I think I cannot have read the original. So, but in that way, I kind of gradually getting towards the Shakespeare. So and finally, when I studied for several years, I decided I will have to study abroad. And when I decided to study abroad, I asked Professor Takahashi where I should go. And well, if you are major in English literature, the Cambridge is the best place. And I just decided to go there. And so that's I think changed my life.
I think that changed quite a lot, yes, because you went through at Cambridge and finished a PhD there.
Yes, and MPhil and PhD.
And finished one in, yes, which, the University of Tokyo doesn't award PhDs very easily. They're still, even now, kind of Weimar in the, well, I do remember that, was it Jacques Derrida or some great French critic who is sitting for his defense of his PhD thesis at the age of 45.
Oh.
Yes, and then he does it, and then the next year 3 books are out, and bam, there are the. But there is this sort of in the French, I think, in French also, but the German system, not a reluctance to award that degree, even perhaps even more so than Cambridge. And so you accomplished that. So you came back from your wandersome days as a young man in school and not serious student. I'm going to remember that when I have one of my smart kids who doesn't come to class. I'm going to say, okay, let's see how smart this guy is. Maybe we can give him a little bit of a break. Actually, I've had students just like you. Oh, or not just like you, but in a sense that I'm going, this person is absolutely brilliant, but I'm having to teach at a certain level, which is a high level, but it's not high enough really, or it's not something that's engaging. This guy wants to be out there. He wants to be out there in the world, and or she wants to be out there in the world. She's very involved, and I really don't discourage that. If they can come in and get the minimal standard done. I remember when I first started teaching in Japan at Hiroshima University, one of the older fellows in there said, "Listen, all of these kids had to study really hard in high school to get in here. You know, they had to study and study. And we kind of think of the first 2 years as, you know, you don't have to go hard on.
That's a Japanese way.
It's the Japanese way, because of
Yes.
course in the American university, they just, but I think it's sometimes that way at certain places, depending on where you are. I remember I was so bad in high school that I managed to enter a good school but with a music scholarship.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And by the way, I wanted to compliment you on the acoustics of your production that I attended, which were fabulous. And what you did as a soundscape. I forgot to talk about that earlier. But I was good in music and terrible in everything else. And I got a music scholarship because I was a good French horn player. I could play.
I was playing trombone.
Trombone.
Yes.
I love trombone. Love trombone. And I, you know, it needs to be revived every year. Somebody has to. Tommy Dorsey, or was it Tommy or Jimmy, who was the trombonist? I forgot. But I just loved that big band music, and the trombone, and also in New Orleans, jazz and even modern rock and roll, the trombone still comes in. Wonderful.
Right. Yes.
Nobody asked for a French horn player in a
horns are difficult. I mean, it's so difficult to play, and the sound of horn is kind of not steady. I mean, it's so exquisite, but not kind of doesn't go like bam. It's one, and it's so difficult.
Well, you have to do it. But I remember my father saying, listen, I'm so happy that you got into a good university. You didn't do very well in high school. And so I'm glad you did. And I don't really think that you're going to make it there, because they're going to expect a lot from you, and you haven't really shown that you can do that. And but I will help you in any way I can. And I want you to know, if or when you fail at university, that you cannot come back and live with your mother and me. That's what he said. And he wasn't talking to me in a strict father way. He was talking to me man to man. You don't live here anymore. And that's not very Japanese, because a lot of students, of course, continue to live at home. And so it's fine in Japan. In the States, in the ethos I was in with my parents, no, you go off to college, but you're finding your own way in the world. And my father said, I'll talk to Mr. Hobbs if you want me to. Mr. Hobbs owned a gas stand. And I imagined myself being at the gas stand working, and my friends coming home from college. And so I went to college and I studied all day and all night. I could barely. So I didn't have a chance. I'd already been out in the world a little bit too much. So I didn't have the luxury when first and second year. But it's a similar type of progress where in both our cases, and in the cases of many other people that I've spoken with, and people on this, Brian Reynolds at UC Irvine, who also does his own theater and has a play coming up, was almost failed out of high school and was a motocross rider.
Interesting.
And somehow managed to get into Berkeley from something like that. So there are many interesting stories. Thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you.
Yours, because Sho, that people kind of view, when you say a Shakespeare professor at the University of Tokyo, there's a kind of image of an ascot in a pipe, and something from.
Well, I'm wearing Hamlet.
And you're wearing your Hamlet
t-shirt.
Yeah. And
this is done by when Simon Godwin came to Japan. This is the Simon Godwin's Hamlet Productions t-shirt.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I love it. Oh, that's a collector's item. That really is.
Yes.
Well, I should mention, there's one thing that you wrote, Hamlet is fat.
Hamlet is fat, yes. He's fat and scant of breath.
And scant of breath.
Yes, that's what the Gertrude said. So he's fat, she's saying he's fat.
Oh.
And how do you interpret this word fat? And I went through all the data in Cambridge, and some explain that it is out of condition, and some says it is just perspiring and so forth. Yeah. It's sweaty or so forth. But the fat people are sweaty, but it is not the synonym. And yes, my PhD thesis concludes that fat is fat.
Fat is fat.
Yes, it is embonpoint.
Well, the kanji you use, shibo, am I right there? Shibo,
Yes, shibo,
yes. So
yes,
that
yes.
means fat.
That means fat, yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, it means he has a huge body.
Yeah.
In French, embonpoint, it's in the good phase.
Yeah.
So
well, he's an aristocrat. He's not wanting for food. And I don't think that it's stigmatized. Fatness is stigmatized in that age. It might be a symbol of your aristocratic background.
Right. Look at the Henry VIII. He has a huge body. He has the huge legs, and that's how men should look like.
Yeah.
So
we don't envision Hamlet as fat though. Maybe because of the history of Olivier and the others who
exactly. So it's cultural difference.
Very in shape. You know, the classical actors have to be in shape. Well, that's just absolutely wonderful. Well, if you have anything you'd like to add, I would love to hear it. But otherwise, I think that we've gotten through
Thank you.
agenda. Yes. But I would like you, if you could, to stay just after we finish recording to debrief just for a moment, and then I'll let you get back. I know that you're busy. And
thank you.
Sensei, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It was just
so
a great
enjoyable.
pleasure.
Yes, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.